Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
You know, I normally try to think up a cool scenario or a question when I start one of these podcasts off to sort of set the scene. But I'm going to change course here a little bit this week and just start off by saying, what the heck is going on with the labor and staffing market? Never in my career, which is I've been about 30 years in the industry, have I seen more issues with finding a hygienist, an assistant, administrative staff, you name it. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this week's episode of Dental Business RX. Specifically, I want to go over some stats regarding this issue. And then I want to take a look at what can you be doing right now to take control of this in your office to make sure that you don't go understaffed. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at MGE. And let's just jump right into this. So first, let's take a look at the stats. I did a presentation at our owners conference. This is an annual event that we have for graduate clients. And we took a look at, this was back in May. We took a look at the stats back then because this has been an issue pretty much since the pandemic began. And I want to give you a little bit of a comparison because now I'm doing this podcast in August of 2021. And I want to just show you from a point of comparison, is this situation, trouble finding staff, getting better, or is it getting worse? Well, let's have a look. First off, there's a survey done by the National Federation of Independent Business. They look at things like business optimism amongst small businesses, as well as how hard it is to fill positions. Well, first off, let's first look at the optimism factor. How optimistic are small business owners? Well, back in May, the optimism index was at 99.8%. It was pretty high. So optimism had gone low during the pandemic and, it had gone up by May. This past month, the end of July, because this is an August podcast, it was at 99.7. So a little down, but not much. Then we get to job openings. How many job openings were there? Well, back in May, I remember showing this graph at the owners conference. It was the highest ever. There were over 8 million job openings in the United States at that time. This was like a big deal. Well, this past month, it was at 10.1 million job openings. It's up by 2.1 million job openings. And then to top that off, and you've probably seen this, this was a headline that was going around recently. There were 10.1 million job openings and only 8.7 million workers looking for work. We now have a situation where there are more openings for jobs than there are people willing to work. So how does this translate to small business? Well, in May, part of this National Federation of Independent Businesses, and by the way, those job opening statistics you can find on the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. They're right there. Yeah, it's bls.gov, I think. Anyway, so in May, 44% of business owners, small business owners, reported that they had a position that they could not fill. Like they had advertised to fill positions and they had positions they couldn't fill. Like there were no applicants, so they couldn't hire someone. 44% of the survey respondents. In July, that number went up to 49%. This is the National Federation of Independent Small Business Openings Hard to Fill Index. So that number went from 44% in May to 49%. Almost half of the small businesses in the United States have positions that they cannot fill right now. And this is on top of all the anecdotal evidence we get from our clients. And keep in mind, MGE clients are sharp. These guys and girls know what they are doing. They know how to hire. They know how to onboard staff. And anecdotally, what are we hearing? Can't find administrative staff, or they'll set people up for interviews and people are blowing off interviews. They're having trouble finding a hygienist. They're having trouble finding an assistant, etc. So this brings us back to what's going on? Like, why are we running into this? And you have those immediate knee-jerk answers. I think it's, I could answer it very simply, but I think that there are a number of factors that contribute to this. So let's start with one that most people don't talk about. But probably since the beginning of the pandemic, you have a lot of people who have changed their life plans. You've had more people move and migrate within the United States the past 16 months than at any other time in years past. You have people staying home, looking to work from home. Maybe they're homeschooling kids. Maybe they moved. There was a survey done recently of U.S. workers under 40 by the Washington Post Schar School, which found that nearly 1 in 3 of these U.S. workers under 40 have thought about changing their occupation or field of work. So you have, a lot of people have looked at, what do I want to do? This maybe has changed a little bit. So that's one factor. Then, of course, we have the factor that most people talk about with regards to this is the additional supplementary unemployment that's been going on pretty much since April of 2020. You've had the federal unemployment, I don't know what you call it, addition supplement. Was originally at $600, if you remember way back when in 2020. It's been at $300. That's supposed to run out September 6th. And you've had about half the states in the U.S., about 24 of them, have opted out of that. Where they don't offer that additional $300. But if you look at it, like, for example, if you have an employee who used to earn $15 an hour or $600 a week for a 40-hour week, depending on their state, they may receive that much between state and federal unemployment. So, you have a situation where someone could be looking at, they can earn as much to stay home as they earn for coming to work. So obviously, and again, I'm not saying that everybody who does that is bad, or some people go, people don't want to work. I'm not going to go there. It's a complex problem, but it definitely is a factor. I think considering that it's not a factor would be foolish. And so essentially what you've got is you have less employees on the market and more people, since with the reopening and that sort of backlog from reopening from the shutdowns and whatnot, you have more demand. So it's like anything. If you have more demand than there is supply, what happens? The price of that thing goes up. If all of a sudden there's less coffee available and you got more people that want coffee, the price of coffee is going to go up. Supply and demand is basic law of economics. So you have that situation going on with employees now, where you have people who can more or less call their own shots. Making things work or making things even more complex is a lot of bigger businesses have started to, get into this a bit. You're not just bidding against small businesses at this point when you're trying to hire, you're bidding against bigger businesses. Back last year, I think it was, or maybe earlier this year, Chipotle raised their minimum wage to $15. You have companies like Royal Farms and McDonald's offering $500 signing bonuses. There was a McDonald's here in the Tampa Bay area where we're located who made national news because they were offering $50 to show up for an interview. So you could show up and get an interview, and they give you $50, and nobody showed at all. And I had you can go online, and if you look you could see corporations raising wages. So there was a list of 20 that I just looked at before I started today's podcast. It's different banks and Target and all the big box stores and various big employers across the United States are raising wages. So you've got that going on. You even have Target, I think at this point, if I read correctly, are looking at they'll pay for an associate's college education in certain, depending on the college they go to. Like they have select schools that they have a deal with. They'll pay for your education if you go work there. So this brings back to you're not only competing against the dentist down the street or the optometrist across town or the medical doctor, in the same building that you're in. You're competing with all the big box stores and other people looking for employees. A lot of people are looking for employees. So it brings it back to, what do you do? What do you do about this? Because you can't necessarily absorb the same amount of hits and punches that a Walmart or a Target or a big bank could absorb. So how do you handle this is really the big question. Well, and this is where I get to the solutions part. See, there's the problem, but we have a couple potential solutions. So first, I want to do this by position. I'm going to look at administrative positions. Then I want to look at dental assistant and hygienist and a couple things to sum up the whole thing so that there's, obviously the whole theme of this show is stuff that you can go apply right now. So let's dive in. So let's first look at administrative positions. These are your front desk positions. So I don't know where this is all going to go. September 6th, you may have the federal supplement shuts off, and then who knows? You may have a lot more people jumping back into the workforce. Or if I were to bet, you have the Delta variant upping its impact on the states right now. So if I had to bet, I would imagine that most likely the federal government is going to extend that supplement. Now, I could be wrong. You may be listening to this show after all this happened, and I am dating myself a bit as far as when this show is going on. But I don't know how this is all going to pay out. But here's the one thing that I know is if I'm going to pay more for something, right, I'm going to expect more. If I'm going to pay more, I'm going to expect more. And one other factor that I haven't discussed yet that is influencing all of this is just the concept of inflation right now. I don't have the current inflation numbers in front of me with the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. The last time I looked, I think last month it was up by 5.1%. I'm not going to get into what all that means, but basically your dollar has less purchasing power, but not just your dollar, your employee's dollar. So, you've probably noticed it anecdotally in groceries or different things that you're buying, gas, etc. Well, your employees are running into the same thing and they're going to need more to survive. So, I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but one thing I should mention is if you haven't raised your fees in a while, you probably need to take a look at raising your fees. You might want to make a 5% fee increase. I would definitely advise that you do that because you don't want to price yourself out of being able to keep your staff or keep good staff because they're getting priced out of, various types of goods and services that they need to survive. Anyway, wanted to just throw that out there before I forget. But anyway, so salary requirements, like what people are asking for, may push what you're offering into a whole new strata of potential personnel. Let me explain what I mean by that. So an entry-level position, which is normally you're hiring a new receptionist, for example, it's an entry-level position. Well, most of the big corporations are paying $15 or more. It could be 16, some are offering 20 for an entry-level position. All right, so if I'm hiring somebody with no dental experience and I'm bringing them in, and let's say unemployment pays them roughly $15 an hour and there's no commute fees or anything or charges or things like that. I don't necessarily want to offer this person $16, $17 an hour in order to compete because I'm going to have to go through training them. Their wages are going to be most heavily affected, the entry-level positions. Whereas someone who is already making $22, $23 an hour, and look, wages are going to vary by the area you're located in. Keep that in mind as well. But that person who is used to making more, maybe a really awesome schedule coordinator, maybe they don't have dental, but they have healthcare experience, or a really, killer insurance coordinator, someone who really knows their stuff. They're used to making 23, 24, 25 an hour. And if this person's really good, chances are they're probably going to be worth as much to me as two entry-level people. So keep in mind that the number of people you have doesn't necessarily equate to the amount of productivity. You might find that you have somebody who's one extraordinarily competent person can outproduce two people. So if I'm being pushed to hire someone who I used to pay $13 an hour, that's what I'm being pushed to hire based on what market forces are telling me, I might instead look and see if I could hire, and maybe I need two of those people. I'll see if I can hire somebody for $22 and they can do what both of those people did. It's kind of an interesting approach to the idea, but you might find you can get somebody who's a lot more seasoned, experienced, and it's unfortunate this doesn't help the entry-level folks, and you're still going to find entry-level folks who want to get into dentistry. But my point being is I would look for somebody who's maybe a bit more seasoned, a bit more experienced, maybe has a bit more of a track that maybe I'm going to be paying a bit more, but that can be a little bit more effective in my practice from an administrative perspective. One thing I'm going to want to look at too, and this is a statistic that I'd recommend that you keep because this kind of is your efficiency statistics, is your collections divided by the number of staff that you have. In other words, if you collect $100,000 a month and you have 5 staff, that's $20,000 a staff member. Well, you want that number to at least stay the same, if not go up over time as you train people. So if I hire staff member number 6 and I was collecting 100 with 5 staff, I would eventually expect to see those collections around 120. So this is a number you're going to want to keep an eye on. Obviously, if I hire number 6 and my collections go down to 80,000, that's a whole other problem at that point. But that's just something to think with because those wages, the folks who are making 22, 25, 26 aren't going to be as drastically affected other than inflation as the entry-level wages were because of this whole bonanza for entry-level positions. Something to think with. Now, what about dental assistants? Here's what I would do with dental assistants is something we've been advising our clients to do is incentivize career growth. I'm taking a little bit of a page out of but we had this idea before Target did. I'm going to throw that out there. If let's say you have a newer dental assistant, maybe you hired him as a sterilization assistant, somebody who may be a floater who's breaking down rooms and cleaning them. Well, give this person a career path maybe to becoming an EFTA. Maybe if they hit certain benchmarks as far as longevity and productivity, you can pay for certain levels of certification. You can have them go get certified to take x-rays. Depending on your state, obviously this varies. Eventually, if someone's been with you for a while, you can help finance their education to become an EFTA, because what it does for them is it makes them upwardly mobile. Now, what's the problem with that? Obviously, so let's say you help fund the education for one of your assistants to become an EFTA, and then they go, hey, thanks for making me an EFTA. This office down the road just offered me $5 more an hour than you're offering me. Well, that's a problem, right? So what do you do about that? Well, here's where I would get an employment attorney, and you should have an employment attorney that you can rely on, that you can talk to and go back and forth with. And you might think, oh, it's fees or whatever. But, that couple $1,000s a year you might spend on an employment attorney will save you a lot in the long run, especially if you mess things up. But what I would do in that case is I'd talk to an employment attorney to help craft an agreement that attaches any monies that you pay for education to an agreement to work for a certain period of time. And then obviously have the attorney draft this. So in other words, let's play this out. So you have this dental assistant. They want to get trained to become an EFTA. You're going to help finance their education. They agree to work for you for 2 to 3 years. And if they leave sooner than that, they owe you a certain portion of that tuition you paid back. They have to pay it back to you somehow. And that would just be part of the whatever agreement that you craft with them. But I would definitely be pushing upward mobility with your assistants. It's a great career. So help support them in it. Now, what about hygienists? Okay, so again, with hygienists, this is actually, if I have to say hygienists, I've heard more problems finding hygienists than any other position. It's funny because, give you an example, we have a client in Southern Virginia, and this doctor had a horrible time finding associate doctors. He's practicing in kind of a remote area. So there weren't a lot of associates available. Well, then the pandemic hits. So you had a lot of people bailing on major metropolitan areas. So now no problem finding associates, but trouble finding other positions. The same thing. We had a client in upstate New York, couldn't find associates. And we said, advertise in the city. I'm sure lots of people want to get out of their 1-bedroom efficiency. They were locked in for 2 months, and it was correct. They wanted to move to a place where they could have a yard. So hygienists, though, have been a bit of a conundrum. There's definitely been some issues with finding hygienists. So what would I do here? First thing I would do is I would, again, incentivize career growth. You can, just like with dental assistants, you can have some type of a CE plan that maybe you help with. And I wouldn't start doing that from the beginning. I would want them to hit certain benchmarks and sort of prove their mettle before I spend any money on them. And again, I'd want some kind of an agreement in place. And you would also want it to be, if they get certified or they're able to do certain things, they can potentially earn more as well. That's one thing you can do with a hygienist. But let's say you're practicing in, Tampa, the area I'm in, and you just can't find a hygienist. Well, any hygienist in the state of Florida is able to practice anywhere in Florida. So I would expand out from where I'm looking. So I would probably then, there's lists of hygienists all over the state. I would expand out. I might send a letter, find if there's some type of a hygiene journal of any kind or hygiene publication that people look at, or an email, so I could get that in front of people that I'm looking for a hygienist. You might find some hygienist who's practicing down in Miami that wants to move to the Tampa Bay area, as an example, and you can take that and apply it to wherever it is that you are practicing. You might be in, Fresno, California, and you can advertise in LA. So maybe somebody wants to move. You never know. So there's that. So you could expand out where you're looking. You incentivize career growth and productivity by offering CE. But let's say you've done all of that and you just cannot find a hygienist. You're coming up goose eggs here. What do you do? Well, a little bit of a story about, this was a long time ago. Back in the early 90s, again, during the first Clinton administration, in the Chicagoland area, there were 5 dentists for every 1 hygienist. I'll say that again. So for every 5 dentists that there were in the Chicagoland area, there was 1 hygienist. So if your hygienist was off for that day or had to take a week off and you were calling in a temp, 9 times out of 10, that temp was a doctor, was a dentist who was temping for that hygienist. So if I just could not find a hygienist, what would I do? Is I'd probably bring in an associate doctor. They seem to be a heck of a lot more available right now than hygienists are, and it solves actually a couple of problems. In many states, you can't practice unless the doctor's there. The hygienist can't just be there alone operating. Some states you can, but in many states you can't. If I have an associate there, they can be there on their own. They're a doctor. For some associates, it's not the ideal long-term solution, and I understand. But let me kind of play this forward for you. So one of the things we go over with clients is this. You want to maintain a decent hygienist to doctor ratio. And for example, normally you want to maintain a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-1.5. In other words, one doctor for every 1 to 1.5 hygienists. Otherwise, what starts to happen, especially when 2 is where I'd max out, 1 to 2. When you start going above 2, the doctor is spending all their time doing hygiene exams and running around between trying to get their procedures done as well, that the doc does not have time to actually properly present treatment. It can actually be counterproductive. They're gloving and degloving, in some cases several times an hour. So you want to maintain that 1 to 1.5 max, 2 max rather, sorry. And 1 to 1 or 1 to 1.5 is good. So let's say you have a regular old solo dental practice and you work 4 days a week and you've got a hygienist who works 4 days a week. All right. Well, you need to add a couple days of hygiene. Let's say you need 2 days of hygiene immediately. Well, bring in an associate doctor with the idea that as they start to get going, they might pick up some of the smaller procedures or some of the other dentistry that you don't have time to do. So then let's say, what does it look like? Maybe a couple months later, it might be 2 days of hygiene and 2 days of dentistry for this associate. So you still got that 1-to-1 ratio, see? You've got the 4-day hygienist, 4-day main doctor owner, you, and then you have an associate going 2 days on hygiene and 2 days as an associate. Then eventually, meanwhile, you keep looking for a hygienist, obviously, and eventually you might end up with 2 hygienists and 2 docs, or a part-time associate and a full-time hygienist. It's not necessarily a terrible idea. I've actually seen it work out several times. And the solution is not to A, be doing the hygiene yourself. That is absolutely not the solution. And B, to just let those patients not be seen. So you got to do something. That's what I would recommend. So I'm going to wrap this up with the last couple points here. One other thing you might do as well, there might be some limited outsourcing that you might want to do. For instance, and you got to be careful with the outsourcing. I wouldn't want to outsource something that really affects my office function or productivity. Like I wouldn't outsource my reception or something along these lines. But I might outsource, for example, my insurance collections or verification. There are companies that do that and they can do it really quick. But if I'm going to bring anybody in, if I'm going to outsource, let's say I hire somebody where I'm throwing them, insurance verification and insurance collections, I'm going to track their productivity and their performance just as tightly as I would track an employee's. If they're not performing, I'm going to replace them or bring it back in-house. That's the first thing. Last thing is, you probably have a situation as you're getting going and you might have some turnover or you're bringing in new people. You really have to take training seriously as you go through this. Once you've determined that somebody is really going to work out in your practice, if you want to keep them in your practice, you got to make sure that you allocate time for training. They got to know what it is that they're getting trained on. You should also have group training where you're going through basic things like the flow of a new patient through your practice, the flow of a treatment plan and presentation through your practice, things along those lines. The main thing is you want to improve team cohesion and keep everybody on the same page, especially in a time where you get this sort of transitory personnel situation that's going on. Anyway, those are, I think that's more than 2 cents. I think I kept it under a half hour. I'm not sure. I don't have the timer here because we advertise 30 minutes or less. I know one day I'm going to bust that 30-minute barrier, in 42 minutes or less. But I hope that helps. And again, if you guys need any help, you can give us a call at 800-640-1140. We'll do a free practice consultation, or you can find out more about our company by going to visit us online at mgeonline.com. Again, hope it helped, guys, and we'll see you at the next episode. Thanks.